Please make it stop.
With one last glance behind her, she set off back the way she'd come. It was time to go. Past time. Finding her way back was easy. Somehow she'd left tracks in the blood, places where the flat surface had cracked, as if it were ice and she in her passing had thawed it, and now once more it had frozen, embedding the motion of the waves. Save for her breath and the splash of her footsteps, the silence was absolute. Just a little bit farther. She glanced back, unable to shake the feeling that she was being watched. Only now, it felt like more than one set of eyes. Unnerved, she began to run full out, heedless of the blood splattering her from head to toe. I just have to make it back. I'll figure out what to do then. Up ahead, in the craters of her old tracks, shadows had begun to pool, like puddles after the rain. At her approach they'd scatter, but now, in her peripheral vision, she saw that they were following her, skimming along the surface of the blood, more appearing all the time, spiraling in from every direction. Here, she thought, slamming to a stop. The original hole had to be here, she was sure. But then, where is it? She looked around wildly. She took several timid steps to the left. Come on. It had to be here. The tracks ended here. She stumbled to the right. Unless, she realized, panic flooding her lungs. Unless it closed. Now frantic, she dropped to her knees, scrambling side to side, searching with her hands beneath the blood. A sickly sour taste was gathering on the back of her tongue. Hee. The same child's laugh sounded right behind her. A shiver galloped down her spine. Slowly, so slowly, her breath locked in her lungs. She turned around. A dark form towered over her, like a nightmare come to life, its edges mixing into the darkness all around, scraps of shadow still flowing into it. A crowd of faces bubbled to the surface, mouths open in anguish, moaning and wailing, but speaking words she could understand, cursing her and begging her for help, for absolution, for blood. Arms emerged from the shapeless ooze, emaciated fingers clawing at the air. For a moment, it was still, as if considering her. Then it spilled forward, its shape sloshing with its movement. She ran, feet pounding, heart kicking against her ribs, terror surging through her veins like poison. She turned and turned again, faster and faster, the blood flying up behind her, the flecks like shards of glass, while the voices trailed in her wake. Stop. She put on a final burst of speed, and as she did the voices seemed to diminish behind her. Thinking she'd gained some distance, she spared a glance back. Just then her left foot missed a step, and she fell hard and slid on her chest. Blood filled her mouth and nose. She lay there gasping and coughing, aching all over, while overhead the fire gazed down at her, its terrible light funneling into her pupils. She tried to rise, to push herself to her feet, but her arms gave way and she collapsed, panting and shaking, like a fawn run to exhaustion. The voices drew nearer. Tasty blood. Unable to go any farther, she clenched her eyelids shut. The noise washed over her, till it seemed to be issuing from inside her own head.
Why won't you come out to try feel well?
There, in the blood, beneath an otherworldly light, she waited. It felt cold when it touched her, when it gripped her wrist, and then it jerked, and she was being dragged. Her eyes snapped open. The smaller Noctura, the one from the train, was pulling her by her wrist. She was too shocked to resist. It left no trace on the blood as it moved, writhing this way and that, though she cut a fine wake. Behind, the larger Noctura was gaining on them, growing taller and taller, until it obscured the light from above. Arms groped after her. Fingers scraped at the bottom of her feet. One mouth opened and tried to close around her leg. She pulled away, spinning in the small Noctura's grip. Ahead she could see the original hole, just now beginning to scab and close over. A moment more and they were over it. The small Noctura pressed her downward. Then, together, they were falling, condensing. It felt like she was passing through dark water, being squeezed from all sides. The pressure crushed her lungs, her eardrums. Just when she thought she could stand it no longer, it ceased. Opening her eyes, she found herself in the train car once more, standing beside the metal table where she had lain, seemingly, all those years ago. The room was no longer dimly lit, but now filled with a bright light. She looked up. Above her was a crack in the air, in substance like the undulating lines of heat that rise from summer roads. Through it came shards of that otherworldly light. As she watched, arms reached into the interstice, pulling at the seams, widening it. A thin stream of black liquid began to trickle through the crack, and as the drops hit the floor they trembled, then slid together, merging into a pool. She knew what was coming. A wide door was set into the side of the train car, the kind meant for loading and unloading, and she crossed to it and tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. She gave a silent scream of frustration. "Hey, wake up," she heard a voice say from the other side of the divider. Then, "What's that light?" followed by the sound of footsteps. Beside her, the pool was congealing, faces already rising from the depths, lips peeled back revealing the darkness within. Trapped now between the doctors and the Noctura, with nothing left to lose and no advantage to be gained from stealth, she hammered her fist into the door handle. In her mind, the boy with black hair did the same. "Harder! Harder!" The footsteps were nearing, and the last remnants of the Noctura trickling through the crack as it began to close, the light of that other world dimming. "Open, goddammit!" With the last of her strength, she struck a final blow, and to her very great surprise, the entire door burst from its track, landing with a crash somewhere out in the darkness. She stood there, stunned, a sudden gust of cold air whipping through her hair. The two doctors watched from the divider, fear clumping in their visages. The right one raised his hand. Before she could call out or move, there was a flash of light and a wheeze of smoke. Pain rocketed from her navel through her spine. She staggered against the wall. She cupped her hand to the wound. Her thoughts scattered in a million different directions. She noticed that the doctor, the one who had struck her, had a wispy mustache and gray eyes. He looked young. His hair was unkempt, as if he'd been asleep. The acrid smoke made her eyes water. Once again she felt like she was floating. She tilted her hand against the light, and for a moment she was shocked to see the crimson of her blood. Her head felt so heavy, her thoughts immobile. Something was coming, but all of a sudden she couldn't remember what. She slid down the wall. She was so tired. How nice it would be to fall asleep right here. "Run!" The voice was like ash in her head, chalky and coarse. It cut through the haze. The room settled around her, the details flooding back. She moved one leg, then the other, the muscles stiff and unresponsive. Screams as the doctors cut side of the Noctura. A liquid squelch as the Noctura tore the first doctor apart. Unnoticed by either, she crawled to the edge of the car, and quietly, without any fuss, dropped out into the night.